Welcome, friends and comrades, to another episode of Escaping the Cave with Carlos Garrido. That is me. I'm a philosophy professor, director at the Midwestern Marx Institute, and Secretary of Education for the American Communist Party. I'm also the author of a few books, including The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism from 2023, and Why We Need American Marxism from 2024. Later on in this program, we're going to be joined by Kyle Pettis, the Chief Labor Analyst for the Midwestern Marx Institute and the Director of Personnel for the American Communist Party. We're going to talk to him about the U.S. labor movement, the apparent split in strategy electorally between the Teamsters and UAW leadership. We're going to talk to him about what the working class can expect from this Trump administration and what the American Communist Party has to offer the American working class, which is the most central question that a Communist Party has to answer. But for now, I want to share some of my thoughts on an event that happened earlier this week. Shortly after the visit of three executives of our party, Jackson Hinkle, Chris Halali, and Haz al-Din, to Lebanon for the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, when Haz and Chris came back, as we just recently announced, they were detained for many hours, interrogated. They had their cell phones taken and other private possessions taken. And this isn't new. I mean, this has been going on for a very long time, even before the founding of the party for some of us. But this should bring up certain questions about the ruling paradigm that we're taught to think about societies through in the universities within the West, in the major think tanks and institutes that deal with not only political theory, but also international relations, where the world is for them split in two. You have the democratic countries, and then you have the authoritarian countries. And if they're really, really authoritarian, then they become totalitarian, which is when you're authoritarian to the level of the totality, and everything is authoritarian about you. And it's a very, very silly and immature and childish way of approaching the world. And it's rooted, if I can be afforded the chance to get a little bit jargony, in what we call abstract thinking in philosophy. It's rooted in a thinking that wants you to think about the world in a way that's disconnected from everything else. You know, just forget about context, forget about the factors that led to the existence of a fact. Let's just separate this thing from the environment that it needs in order to exist in the first place, and then sort of lie to ourselves into thinking that now that we have separated it from its context, now it's when we can understand it truly. Now is when we really know what's going on. And that's what these people do with terms like democracy, with terms like authoritarianism or dictatorship, etc. They never ask the concrete question, which we do as Marxist-Leninists, which is, well, democracy for whom? Dictatorship for whom? Against whom? Authoritarianism towards what ends? You know, there's an example that Maximilien Robespierre, the famous Jacobin leader that he provides, where he says something along the lines of, you know, are we violent? Well, he says, yeah, it's authoritarian in the same sense that the sword that's being waved by the freedom fighter glistens when it gets touched by the sun, in the same way that it glistens in the hands of those who fight to sustain oppression, to oppress people. Yeah, it's a very abstract and disconnected characteristic. Of course, you have in every state a certain form of authority, of dictatorial power that is exerted. The question is, by whom and towards whom? That's the real question of political philosophy. In whose hands does the monopoly of power, does the control over ideological and repressive institutions lay? And that's what we have to ask here. And events like the ones that happened to our comrades recently, where they're stopped and they have their democratic and so-called bourgeois rights completely removed from them, stripped within a matter of hours, simply for the case of supporting peace and condemning a belligerent attitude towards a country that we have no reason to be belligerent towards, a country like Lebanon. Why not have peace with countries like Lebanon and Russia and China and Cuba, etc.? So simply for having the opinions that are contrary to the status quo of the American foreign policy establishment, we're going to have our rights violated? What type of democracy is this? What this shows is the dictatorial phase of a certain type of democracy. Well, whose democracy? That's the great question. It's answered, I believe, by Lenin most correctly, where he says it's democracy for the rich, for the insignificant minority of society. It is those who own capital in capitalist society that have the power to decide amongst themselves what goes on. For them, this is experienced as democracy. For the rest of society, it is dictatorial power. It is the power, the dictatorship of capital and of the capitalist as the personification of capital that ends up determining what the hell happens in society. Yes, that has the democracy for one class and the dictatorship against another. In socialism, it's completely different. Yes, from their standpoint and from what they consider to be democracy, there is no democracy. No. Why? Because democracy is now not in the hands of those who own capital, but in the hands of those that actually produce something for society, in the hands of the working class, of the peasantry, of the popular classes, of common folk. Those are the ones that have democracy now. And of course, if they have democracy, they also have dictatorial power. They have the ability to exert their rule, their power over those that are threatening that social order that is governed by working class people. And who are those? Well, it's the capitalists from the previous form of life that dominated in an area that just had a social revolutions, who are colluding to overthrow that revolution and doing so in a way that is in connection with international powers foreign to that country that also have vested interest in overthrowing that social revolution. And in the way the world is structured, it's usually the case that it's the US who is that global hegemonic powerhouse that helps counter-revolutionary forces in places where a revolution has occurred. For that class, yes, that revolution, that new social order seems dictatorial. It is to a certain extent. They're right about that. But it's democratic for a whole larger sector of society that now experiences democracy in ways in which they didn't before. And I would even be as bold as to say this isn't simply a question of the particular form that democracy takes. I think that if we really dig down deep to it and ask what the hell is democracy, we have to break it down etymologically and realize that it's composed of two central concepts. Demos, which doesn't just mean people in general. It has a connotation of, a popular sense, common folk, really, that's what it means. And kratos, which means the ability to rule and to exert power over. It's really when the people, common people, el pueblo in Spanish, have the ability to rule, have power. That is what the dictatorship of the proletariat is. If the proletariat is the vast majority of society, the working class, and the dictatorship of the proletariat is the explicit affirming of that ability to dictate and to rule and to have power over itself, to have sovereignty and autonomy, that is all democracy is. And so in that sense, dictatorships of the proletariat, socialist democracies, are tenfold time as in line with the etymological real understanding of democracy than any other previous form of democracy, whether it's bourgeois democracy or the slave democracies of ancient Greece that were, of course, premised upon slave labor. And events like the one that we saw with Chairman Haas getting stopped, or International Secretary Chris Halali getting stopped, show us that, yeah, that's the dictatorial power within those countries that mainstream political theory and international relations want us to think as democratic, but it's only democratic in terms of the procedural formalisms that support the bourgeois ruling order, which is hegemonic still globally. It's not democratic from the standpoint of actually upholding the rule and power of common people. And it's, I think, events like this that force us to really reflect on the questions that we have at hand. They allow a certain truth to arise and force us to pause. We were going through our life. We have the everydayness that we're just quotidianly going through. And then something happens. It breaks that flow. It brings about a state of fallenness that we're forced to reflect on the thing. And we have what Badiou calls a truth event there that forces us to think about things. And if we have fidelity to that truth event, we're an ethical person, and etc. I'm not going to get all that into it, but this is what this event is. It should be a reminder that that is the power of dictatorship within what calls itself democracy, which is really, of course, bourgeois democracy, and the democracy that communists are fighting for is something that is substantially greater, substantially more expansive and real and universal than what we have in the bourgeois form of life. And in order for it to be so, it needs to contain that element of dictatorship, that ability to dictate the will of the people over and against the will of those that seek to bring us back to an order where a few were very rich and had a lot of power, but the vast majority didn't have any property, didn't have any resources or possessions, and definitely didn't have any power. That's enough for the first part of our program. Now we turn to a conversation with Kyle Pettis, again, the Director of Personnel for the American Communist Party and the Chief Labor Analyst for the Midwestern Marx Institute. We'll be talking to him about U.S. labor, the Teamsters, the UAW, the seemingly difference in strategy that they employed for the 2024 election. We'll also talk to him about the Trump administration and what he thinks is going to offer U.S. Workers and why it is that the American Communist Party is the party for the working class here in the U.S. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss this. Friends, we live under a dictatorship of capital still, which means that in order to keep up the work that we're doing, we need financial contributions. There's many different ways in which you can help us financially. You can become a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. You can buy some of our books, which you can find at midwesternmarx.com/books. You can sign up for my classes and the other classes we offer with our Marxism School, which you can see at the Midwestern Marx selfie page. You can also support my work personally as a writer and everything else that I do through Substack at my Substack page, which is Philosophy in Crisis. In addition, if you want to support the American Communist Party financially, you can also donate to the party at acp.us. If you want to subscribe to the party's journal, which I am the chief editor of, you can do so at redamerica.acp.us. And if you can't support us financially at all, at least help us get our message out there. Share this program on your social media, share it with your friends and family and coworkers, and get it out as far and wide as possible. We thank you dearly. Kyle Pettis, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The first question I want to ask you is about two of the major unions of this country, the Teamsters and the UAW, both of them headed by two Shawns that represented the militant trade unionist consciousness wing of their unions. However, even though they both had very similar trajectories to coming to power within the unions of representing a very militant pro-worker agenda, at least in comparison to what was there before, they had extremely, at least seemingly, different strategies when it came to the 2024 election. Of course, Fain came out and endorsed the Democrats. They had this whole campaign of calling Trump a scab. And then Shawn O'Brien for the Teamsters actually spoke at the Republican National Convention and ended up not endorsing any of the two parties, which are, of course, merely two cheeks of the same buttocks, as George Galloway is fond of saying. Do you think that there's a deeper strategy that they're coordinating behind closed doors on, or was that a genuine split in tactic that each different union ended up embarking on?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing right now is a renewed sense of pragmatism from elements within the labor movement, both from Shawn Fain's more grassroots, radical UAW approach. Radical, of course, compared to the last several decades of what the UAW has done before his leadership, which is not a whole lot. And Shawn O'Brien's Teamsters Union. These are both of the new administrations within these unions are taking radically different approaches to their predecessors and revitalizing rank and file participation within the union structure. I think that just because they have a opposing view, let's say, publicly on the state of conventional politics within the United States, the UAW, of course, endorsing Biden, who lost, and the Teamsters giving no real endorsement, but Shawn O'Brien speaking at the RNC. I think that this confers a tactical approach, a very good strategy from these elements of labor, wherein they are making politicians actually have to make actual compromises and promises to their unions for the purpose of securing an endorsement. Shawn Fain is taking an interesting approach by endorsing the Democrats. Of course, the Democrats, Biden didn't end up winning. The Democrats' power is kind of fleeting, but I believe this was an approach, kind of a divide and conquer strategy cooked up between the two Shawns, who have very good relationship with one another, have worked very effectively presently and in the past, and both have very similar goals for their unions, once again revitalizing the rank and file and bringing them more into the center of the conversation within the union. And additionally, this relationship, for example, the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which is an organization within the Teamsters Union, they endorsed Shawn O'Brien. Their guest speaker at their latest convention was Shawn Fain. There is a lot of backroom conversation between the two unions who are trying to work together on a larger labor strategy. Shawn Fain famously, at the end of the stand-up strike, had declared that he wants other unions to start signing their contracts with the same deadline of May 1st in, I believe it was 2028, if I remember correctly, or 2027. And the purpose of which is to move forward with, really, in everything but name, a general labor strike to force concessions from the capitalists writ large. So there is a lot of radical energy kind of being moved around within these two labor unions, and combined they can do a lot of good. The difference in approach to politics is, again, simply, I believe, pragmatic. Shawn Fain wants to move to try and appease Democratic bases, whereas Shawn O'Brien is much more interested in the nature of the truckers themselves and the Teamsters Union, who lean much more conservative, lean much more towards the Trump MAGA phenomenon. So he's moving to encapsulate these elements. Additionally, Shawn O'Brien has made very good headway working with Republican congressmen, senators, throughout the country. For example, in the state of Missouri, we had a situation where the RNC was putting, the GOP was putting right to work on the ballot every single year, forcing mainly the Teamsters Union was the number one union fighting this legislation, this anti-worker, anti-union legislation that the GOP was pushing out. Year after year, they were putting this on the ballot, and the Teamsters Union had to exhaust resources and manpower every single year to try and combat this and get it overturned by the people, because there was a direct, it was put on the ballot for people to directly vote on every single time, and every single time it was defeated. So instead of spinning their wheels and having to continuously work on this defensive approach from the GOP, Shawn O'Brien spearheaded an initiative where he met with Senator Hawley from Missouri and was able to reach a compromise of sorts and work together to stop having the GOP attack the basis of the unions, which is their right to organize every single year. So this freed up a lot of manpower and resources for the Teamsters Union to redirect it into more offensive plans for labor. So O'Brien has shown a ability that other unions have not, probably due to a lack of willingness by a lot of unions, to actually reach across the traditional aisle and talk to the GOP and affect positive results, whereas most unions who are simply backing the Democrats these days seem to be getting very little for their payout. If we recall, during the previous Biden administration, he continuously promised that there was going to be a move to pass what was called the CARE Act, which would have given unions much more free ability to organize workplaces, to move productively, to kind of actually go on the offensive with labor organizing strategies, and with a much lower barrier to entry for the unions than what currently exists. And of course, we all know the CARE Act never materialized. It was a bit of a bait put out on the hook by the Biden administration that was never fulfilled. So it's another empty promise for the Democrats. And I think that a lot of unions are starting to realize this and either become very lackluster in their support for the Democrats, or they're doing what Shawn O'Brien is doing and looking for political alternatives. So I think that just because we see on the face of it Shawn Fain and Shawn O'Brien taking divergent courses when it comes to traditional electoral politics in this country, I think very much that they're on the same page, which is to use the electoral politic circus for whatever advantage they can gain. Shawn Fain was able to, through the stand-up strike, and this is probably largely why he ended up endorsing Biden, he was able to pressure the NLRB that was under the Biden administration and Biden himself into forcing a concession from the big three automotive in the form of reopening the Belvedere Assembly in Illinois, putting, American manufacturing jobs back on the table, which was probably the only jobs created by the Biden administration, which was really fought and paid for by the UAW, the United Auto Workers. And Biden got to get his little, gloating line that he created jobs, which in reality he really didn't, but he was necessary to apply the pressure to the automotive sector. And, the UAW was able to secure that win, and it'll be a union plant producing electric vehicles, something that's, largely untapped as a source of organized labor at this point. So it's all about, the end of the day, the unions are about securing contracts and good conditions for their workers. They don't care too much about electoral politics, so long as they're allowed to continue doing the work that they are designed to do. So if that means appeasing the GOP or appeasing the Democrats, they'll do it, and that's completely fine. That's completely in line with what their mission is, and they're not overtly political organizations, again, which I've said many times in the past.
The second question I want to ask you pertains to this Trump administration. We've heard a lot of what he's been doing in terms of foreign policy, the dismantling of USAID, the perhaps moves towards pulling out of NATO, his attempts to end the proxy war against Russia, and many other things. But one of the things I've heard the least about when it comes to the Trump administration is how he's going to do regarding labor in the U.S. I think part of what's interesting here is that the MAGA base is composed of a lot of working class, especially blue collar people. How do you think Trump is going to be for the American working class?
I don't presume to know exactly what Trump is envisioning with, what his administration is going to do directly with labor. I think that Trump is somebody who tends to take on the flashier issues for the purposes of a self-aggrandizement and, centering himself as a authority on the matter. And when it comes to things that are much more lackluster and out of the headlines, he tends not to take any stance at all, and simply allow the bureaucracy he's surrounded himself with to deal with these things. I think that presently he views U.S. labor disputes as something lackluster and not really headline worthy. So I think he's taking less of a direct interest. I think if that situation was to change and there was a form of populist energy around reinvigorating the labor movement, if the Teamsters or the UAW or any other union for that matter was able to make it into front page headlines with a new, organizing strategy or something that was really captivating the attention of the broad masses of the American people, I think Trump would feel compelled to intervene directly and more than likely take a somewhat populist stance, conceding to the masses as something kind of characteristic of his administration for the most part, at least in words, not often in deeds and in the fine print, of course. But without that, without any sort of large-scale penetration to the masses about what exactly is going on in the labor struggle, I think that it will just be business as usual. Many of the same decisions from the NLRB of the previous administration will continue into this administration. I don't really see this, Project 2025 fabled complete destruction and dismantling of the trade unions. I don't think that's politically viable for Donald Trump, and I don't even think it's actually necessarily, a desirable outcome, frankly, especially given the fact, once again, the unions like the Teamsters Union have shown the ability to work with GOP, elected officials. And I'm not sure what the future holds, but I can assure you that, the UAW, the Teamsters Union, some of these more vanguard, trade unions will be ready to respond to whatever the Trump administration decides to throw their way. I don't think that at this, at the very least, we're not getting empty promises from the Biden administration and as concerns things like the CARE Act and everything else. And we haven't seen outside of the public sector unions, we haven't seen any big moves from the Trump administration as far as really going after workers' rights substantively. So I'm not sure, but we'll all be ready, I'm sure of that.
The next question I'd like to ask you is about the party that we're both in the executive board of, the American Communist Party. I think one of the most important questions that a party of this type has to ask itself is what it can offer its working class in its mother country. So, what do you think the American Party concretely is able to offer the U.S. working class?
I think that's the most important question. It's kind of our reason d'etre, our reason for existence as a party. What do we provide the working class as a communist party? First and foremost, of course, it seems a bit vague and obvious, though, is that we are a party whose only loyalty is to the working class. It's not to any other class within society, and it's not to any sort of idealistic notions of what that looks like. So we are a materialist-based party. We believe in advancing the cause of the working class and the working class alone, even at the expense of any other class in society. So I think that is, number one, the most important aspect. Now, how that looks in the day-to-day efforts of the party chapters, the cadre on the ground, how that looks currently is that we have been assisting in labor demonstrations across the country, assisting in workers getting organized. We also, I can say, and I won't say where to, ensure we have no problems, but we have individuals who have, proceeded with organizing their workplaces, their salting efforts, for example, specifically in things like Amazon, things that will bear fruit in the future, but of course are a long and painstaking process, as any labor organizer would know. And, of course, we have our rank and file members on the strike line. We were supporting the Amazon striking Teamsters. We were supporting, various other minor labor struggles across the country. So that anywhere workers are standing up for their rights, we are there to assist them. And not only just assist them through, showing up and standing in solidarity at the strike line, but also, like I said, concretely in assisting in organizing. For example, currently I'm in New Jersey. I'm going to be meeting with some of the drayage truckers who are at the work out of the Port of New York, New Jersey. There's about 8,000 truckers out there. And a lot of them have an interest in organizing and, getting formed up into a union. And they feel like there's not been a lot of momentum or capability from, other labor organizers in the area, probably because there's a lot of work to be done in organized labor in the United States right now, and there aren't enough hands. And us, our people at the American Communist Party, we're more than willing to jump into the fray and lend what labor we can to ensure the successful outcome of the organization of the truckers at the Port of New York, New Jersey. So, this is the type of initiatives that we're undertaking. We're not just going out to the strike lines, but we're also actively organizing labor everywhere that we have a chapter. That is the goal. We know that trade union consciousness is only really one step away from class consciousness, and from that, blue-collar workers and workers writ large who have achieved some form of nascent trade union consciousness are, on the path to, understanding what we're putting out there as far as a class conscious position and highlighting class antagonisms within the country and realizing that they are soldiers in a war that has been being fought since before they were born, whether they want to be or not. And that war is the class war. So we are the fighting organization of the working class in that conflict. And we want all of the working class of this country to, of course, join up with us, get politically educated, and understand how best to fight back against the, capitalist class, which is exploiting them as we speak. So the capitalists are organized in their monopolies and in their cartels, and it's time for the American working class to get organized. And that's why that's really truly what we provide to the working class, is the ability to become organized for the purposes of actually winning this class war.
So our party, the American Communist Party, has just embarked on its first ever recruitment drive. And I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to those people out there, working class or parts of other sectors of society, that might be in different ideological spaces, perhaps some of them leaning MAGA, perhaps some of them leaning Biden, and perhaps they were convinced by some of Biden's pro-worker rhetoric. Perhaps some of them are leftists and are, the sort of people that watch Hassan and were a part of the Bernie movement, etc. Why do you think that these different sectors of the political horizon in the U.S., each one dissatisfied with the status quo in various different ways, why do you think the American Communist Party is a party that they should be invested in? Why is it that you would say that the rational kernels, as we're fond of saying here, of what they enjoy about each of the different sectors of politics that they claim to identify with, why is it that they, should seek the Communist Party, the American Communist Party, as the actual avenue that could satisfy some of the things that they desire to get out of politics?
Our recruitment drive, like you said, has been going on for a little over a month now, and it's full steam ahead on that effort. I think that the number one thing that we've been focusing on is just trying to get the word out, trying to highlight some of the good work that we've been doing internationally and domestically to whatever audiences we can reach. And additionally, I think that kind of an appeal to people who have yet to join the party. This is, if you're a working class individual, or you are a person who thinks that the working class should have a bigger slice of the pie, a bigger voice at the table, so to speak, this is the party for you. It doesn't matter where you come from politically. It doesn't matter what your journey has been up to now. What matters is what you do moving forward. It matters what your end goal is actually going to be, and if it's going to be achieved. And the only way it's going to be achieved, if it is for the working class to have power, is through the American Communist Party. We're it. So I would say to those who maybe, come from leftist background, come from a liberal background, even come from a conservative background, come from whatever background you come from, that doesn't matter. That's the great thing about the class struggle, is that you're an active combatant in that war, no matter what your superficial political beliefs are. Once you realize that fact, you have a duty and a responsibility to get organized and to move forward our class's position in actually having power. So join up, frankly. It's never been easier to join. You can go on the website, click a couple buttons, fill out a couple forms, and you're in. We have dues for the reserve members. The dues cost as much as a Netflix subscription. And once you are in the process and you are a reserve member of the party, you're going to be put into, direct communication with your chapter executive for whatever state you're in, and you're going to get the ability to get plugged in and get to work. And we have a very unique system at the American Communist Party. If you're a reserve member, which is how everybody starts now, and you're consistently showing up and doing the work and everything else, you're going to start to progress into what we call a cadre member, a member who is, has the time and dedication and ability to really carry the fight forward with as much free time and capabilities that they can, and being actively involved. And through that, you're going to start to earn constitutional rights through the party, the ability to participate in democratic discussion, and the ability for you to actually start to be developed into a leader in the working class struggle. So, this is a very unique sort of process that we have here at the ACP, and it ensures that, our guys who, and ladies, of course, who are on the ground, they're the ones who, they actually have earned the position of respect and the ability to actually carry forward that class struggle through organizing and actually being competent on the ground. So if you want to be trained up to be a good organizer in your community in the labor struggle, and being educated and by Carlos Garrido here through the sort of works of the Marxist-Leninist canon, this is the organization for you as well. Like I said, we don't really care where you've come from. We care about where you're going. So that's the most important thing. Additionally, I'll say is that if you are somebody who wants to get involved, but you don't feel like you have all the time and capabilities to, be out there as every weekend, doing good work, organizing the work and everything else, but you're still somebody who wants the opportunity and wants to get involved as much as they're able to. That's the other great thing about reserve status, is that you're a reservist, essentially. You have the ability to, when you have the time, put in that effort. And when you don't have the time, you're under no obligation to, attend every meeting, attend every event. We make it easy for anybody who has. I'd rather have 100 people join who can dedicate 2 hours, a month, and use use those guys effectively for the 2 hours a month that they have, than only bring in 10 people who can dedicate, 5 hours a month. In the end, we're still utilizing everybody at the best of their ability, and putting them to work for a common goal and a working class victory.
Comrade Kyle, thank you so much for being here, brother, and thank you to all of those who watched. This has been another episode of Escaping the Cave with Carlos Garrido. See you all next Friday.